So today, obviously by the title, we're going to be talking about things to look for when buying a used bike. So right off the bat, when you're buying a used bike, there are three major steps to the process. One is researching and finding the bike. Number two is meeting the seller and seeing the bike in person. And number three is if you end up buying the bike, getting the bike inspected to make sure everything is looking good on it. So with the first step of researching the bike, first things first, biggest tip when it comes to buying a used bike is don't be eager to buy the bike. There are tons of bikes out there on the market and a ton of used bikes out there on the market. So take your time when looking for bikes. Just because you see a good deal on one bike doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good bike overall. They could be trying to get rid of that bike for many different reasons. You want to look at places like Craigslist, like Facebook Marketplace, your local dealerships like used sections on their website. All these places are places that you can go to find quality used bikes. You just have to take the time and actually search for them. So once you've searched around and find the bike that you think you want to buy, the second thing you want to look for is, if you're buying from a private seller, is you want to make sure after you've gotten in contact with them that they have the title in hand and it is a clean title. You don't want to show up and find out that they don't have the title, or you don't want to show up and find out that the title is wrecked or salvaged, and then that becomes a hassle in the long run to get it to a clean title bike. Now if you're buying like a stunt bike or something, then it probably won't matter. But overall, if you're buying a bike that you're going to be riding on the road, you want to make sure that the seller has that title in hand and it is a clean title. So after you verified that the seller has a title and the title is clean, the next thing that you want to do is you want to set up a meeting place and a time to look at the bike. Now most people will recommend that you don't meet the seller at their home, because you never know what could happen or who could be there. And also a lot of people are going to recommend that you bring another person with you, not even just to like help you look at the bike, but just because if something goes wrong, you want to have backup there or someone that can witness what's happening. After you set up a meeting place and a time to look at the bike, the next step that you're going to want to look into is you're going to want to basically go on to YouTube or Google or to any forum site, and you want to just look up common problems with the bike. You never know exactly what problems that a bike could have, especially if it's a bike that you've never owned before. So being able to look at some problems that the bike might have when you go to look at it, you know a baseline of things to look at. Now we're going to hop off this bike in a second and show you some things that are specific to the DRZ and some specific things in general that you want to look for when looking at a used bike. But overall, YouTube and forums can definitely be your friend when it comes to finding common problems. So the day has come for you to go look at the bike. Now a good practice of something to do when you're going to look at a used bike is make a list. So right here I kind of have my list of basically what to talk about in this video. But overall, a list like this of things to actually go down and check can be really good and helpful for you when you're actually looking at a used bike. So the first thing on my list is you want to check the bike cold. So you want to tell the seller when you're going to look at the bike, don't start the bike, I want to look at the bike cold, because when the bike is warm, it could be hiding problems that you don't even know about. Then, on top of that, when you first look at the bike, while it's still cold, when you come up to the bike, you want to touch the engine, like right here. You want to touch it on the other side, something like the casings, maybe a pipe or something. But touch it lightly, because you never know if the bike has been started. If you feel heat, that means the bike has probably been started. If you don't, then you're probably good to go. I'm not going to touch my bike right now because I just got done riding it, so it is pretty hot. Now that you've checked that the engine is cold, the next thing that you want to check is you want to check the frame. So you want to check around like the welds on the frame, like right here. If you're doing a sport bike, you want to check all around the frame right here, because if you drop the bike without crash protection, one of the things that can happen is you can end up cracking the frame, and cracking the frame is a no-go. That right there can salvage out your bike right there. So the frame being damaged is one of the biggest things for a used bike that can basically ruin your time when you go to try to plate your bike or get it inspected. After you've checked that the frame has no cracks or broken welds or anything like that, the next thing you want to check is you want to look around the neck area. Depending on your bike, it could be on this side, it could be on that side, it could be stamped somewhere else on the frame, but you want to look at the VIN and you want to match it up to the VIN on the title. So that's an easy way right there to know whether or not the bike's been stolen, whether or not the seller is who they say they are, and the bike is actually in their name. And that's a pretty important one as well when it comes to actually titling the bike for yourself and actually buying the bike. So now that you've checked the frame, now we can start getting down to the nitty-gritty of things to look on the bike. Now you can tackle this in many different ways. The way I would start first is look at the bodywork on the bike. Now, bodywork being damaged isn't really a deal breaker when it comes to buying a used bike, but it could indicate things like a drop. So if you see anything like scratches on the bodywork, or if you looked at the bike and you see that the bodywork is actually a paint color that isn't stock on the bike, that could indicate another thing like a drop, because when they dropped the bike, they decided to switch out the fairings, maybe painted over the scratches or whatnot, and actually got new colors. Now, like I said, new colors doesn't always indicate that type of issue, but most oftentimes it will actually indicate probably an underlying problem like a drop or something with the bike. You also want to check things like the bar ends. You want to check things like the frame sliders or the axle sliders. If they have frame sliders, check those. I mean, those are easily replaceable, but you never know if someone actually would, because they can often have scratches. You want to check things like the mirrors and the lights. So like the tail light will be the first thing to hit, with the side of the mirror, the bar end, or the light like this. All those will be first things to hit when it comes to crashing a bike. So the next thing that I would check after checking the bodywork is I would check the forks. Now, if you're buying a bike like the DRZ or a Super Sport or any bike of that nature, the first thing that people like to do with those bikes is they like to wheelie them. And now when wheelies are set down hard, the one thing that you'll notice is that oftentimes the forks will actually be leaking here. You can rub your finger around it without a glove on, obviously, and you could possibly come away with like some black gunk on your finger. That's basically oil leaking from the forks, which could indicate a problem with maybe you have to replace your forks. There could be dirt or debris up in there, and you could do like a seal saver method. So all that with the forks and the bodywork aren't necessarily deal breakers when it comes to buying a used bike, but they're definitely parts where you can haggle and talk to the seller and try to barter the price down and basically get them to give you a better deal, because I mean, no one wants to replace fairings or deal with fork seals when they first buy a used bike. So get that price down if those are things that are happening. Now, while you're still looking at the forks, another thing you want to check for is you want to check for pitting. So that's kind of like dents in the fork that could possibly also lead to the forks leaking. While you're also down here, you want to check the tire tread. Tires, like another thing like forks and bodywork, is another thing that you don't want to replace right away when buying a bike. So being able to check the tires and seeing that they have good tread can be something that can benefit you in the long run, or if they have bad tread, can be something that you can barter that price down even more, because no one, like I said, wants to replace their tires. Another thing you want to check for while you're up here at the front is you want to make sure the bars are straight. So you want to sit on the bike, straighten the bars, and make sure that they are looking good. You don't want to buy a bike that has wonky bars, because like I said, once again, could indicate a drop. While you're walking around the bike as well, you want to look for any spots of like rust on bolts, especially on like the rims or the rotors, like the brake rotors, like around this area right here. Something along bolts like here, anywhere around the engine, the chain, back rotors, rear rotors, or anything that is basically metal on the bike. You want to make sure that there is no rust, because that can indicate that the bike has been sitting outside for a long period of time. You also want to open the gas cap on the bike, because when you open the gas cap, if the tank has been sitting for a while, the gas can also rust the tank. And so you just want to open it up, shine a flashlight in there, make sure there is no rust around the gas tank as far as you can see. You also want to check the brake pads. So oftentimes if you go behind like this area right here, you can see the brake pads, you can see how much wear is left on the brake pads. You also want to check the brake lever. So when you pull in the brake lever, even without the bike started, obviously, you don't want this brake lever to just bottom out to the bar. If the brake lever bottoms out to the bar, that could be an indication of the brake fluid hasn't been changed in a long time. There's a problem with the master cylinder. And that could be a deal breaker for you right there, because you never know what can go wrong with the brake system. You also want to check the chain of the bike. So you want to make sure that there's no kinks in the chain, that it's well maintained. My chain actually needs a little bit of a cleaning, but you want to run your hand along the chain, make sure there are no tight spots, no binding spots, anything that indicate that the chain needs replacing, because once again, that's another thing that you could take the price down of the bike for. So after you've looked over the bike fully, the next thing that you want to do is you want to start the bike. So like I said earlier, you wanted to make sure the bike was cold. Now when it comes to starting the bike, you want to start it up.
And you want to make sure that, one, if you're buying a carbureted bike, you don't have to pull the choke out and have the choke out for a long period of time, because that can indicate issues right there. You want to make sure that if the bike does start with choke, that maybe about 30 seconds after it's been on choke, you can take it off the choke and it runs smoothly like this. So another thing I forgot to mention, if you're buying a bike that's not a DRZ, when you turn that key, you want to make sure that the fuel injection primes, because a bike like a fuel injected bike, the fuel injection priming is like the lifeline of your actual gas getting to your engine. So if that doesn't happen, that could indicate problems right there. Now, while you're looking at the bike and listening to the bike, another thing that you want to do is you want to take your hand, kind of put it near the exhaust, somewhere around here. Don't touch it because it could be hot, but depending on how long you've had the bike running. But you want to make sure you don't feel any excessive air blowing out from the headers. That can indicate an exhaust leak. You also want to let the bike sit for a little bit of time. Make sure that there is no overheating. If the bike has a temperature gauge, and like the DRZ, you want to make sure that that temperature doesn't spike up super quickly. You want to make sure that if the bike has fans, that the fans cut on actually when the bike reaches that temperature, because if the bike overheats super quickly, it could indicate a problem with the coolant system. Maybe there is no coolant in the bike. Maybe the coolant system isn't actually flowing coolant into the bike to cool the bike down. Maybe the fans don't work. You never know. But you want to basically get that bike to sit for a little bit of time. Make sure there is no cooling issues with the bike. Make sure those fans cut on, and then you're good to go right there. Now that the bike's been sitting for a little bit of time while idling, good thing to do is give it a little bit of revs. You don't want to see any like smoke coming out from the bike. You don't want to hear any like whining revs or anything like that. You don't want to hear anything like exhaust backfiring or popping. Now the DRZ, it pops normally kind of like that, but if you have a bike that backfires or anything of the sort, you don't want to have that, because that can indicate problems with the bike's exhaust system. And then also, now that you've had the bike sitting for a little bit of time, something that you can do is you can either leave the bike on or you can turn it off, but you want to check that the bike doesn't have any leaking fluids. So just observe the ground around it, make sure it's not leaking any coolant, make sure it's not leaking any oil. You can get under the bike, look at kind of like this skid plate if you're buying a DRZ, or something like the engine bay. Make sure that there's no oil leaking there. Look all inside the bike, make sure there's nothing leaking oil, because leaking oil can indicate more bigger problems that you don't want to have to worry about when it comes to buying a used bike. Now, this might be something a little bit more specific to the DRZ, because the DRZ seat's a little bit harder to take off. But with a sport bike, you can usually just turn the key and take the seat off, but you want to check the battery. Make sure that the battery has no corrosion around it. Make sure that there's no like wires being split, and that everything looks good under the seat. Then finally comes down to a test ride. If you've looked over the bike, if you're still thinking about it, now not everybody will let you test ride their bike. Some will let you test ride it with cash in hand, some might not at all. But the one thing you want to do, if they don't let you test ride it at all, have them just ride past you a few times. Make sure they can click through all the gears and just watch them shift the bike. Now if you get to ride it yourself, go down, ride it, make sure it can shift in every gear. Make sure that there's no whining in the gears. Make sure there's no grinding of gears. Another thing you want to look for while riding or while stopped is you want to make sure when the bike's handlebars turn to any full direction, you want to make sure that the bike isn't revving up super high. That could indicate a sticky throttle. You can also just check the throttle free play as well. Make sure that there isn't an excess or no throttle free play at all. And then finally, once you've test rode the bike, you've made sure that everything is okay, and you've looked over the bike one final time, it comes down to talk numbers. Like I said, with all the things that we talked about before, if you see any of those issues, you can haggle that price down a little bit. Then if you want to buy the bike, and then the next thing that I would recommend is that you take the bike and you go get it inspected, because finally with an inspection on the bike, maybe you missed something that you didn't see in your initial look over of the bike. Maybe the shop mechanic will find it. If there's no problems, then you did good. Maybe they'll find a problem. Maybe it'll be a simple fix, and then you'll be good to go after they fix that. So overall, those are my tips on how to buy used bikes and things to look for. Hope this helps you in your process of looking for a used bike. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to see more content in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.